So to see HBO, kind of show up in this way and get so many nominations is an interesting endorsement for its strategy at a time when a lot is potentially about to change.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. So today on the show, the Pitt and Hacks, they scored big this morning, racking up more than 24 Emmy nominations each. But why did another fan favorite, the hockey romance heated rivalry, get snubbed? We're going to have all the details on the Emmy nominations. And President Trump says the ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran is over after strikes from both sides overnight. We're going to hear from inside Iran in just a moment. Up first, though, I want to start at the NATO summit and President Trump with that Iran announcement that has sent the world scrambling yet again. So at his news conference today, President Trump said that he is not sure he wants to find a peaceful solution with Iran.
We can play games, but I'm not sure I want to make a deal. Let's just finish the job.
Now, that wasn't the only source of tension in the summit, but there does seem to be some success with Ukraine. So I want to bring in NBC News White House correspondent Mariska Alba, who is at the summit for us in Turkey. Hi, Monica.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's good to have you. So I spoke with our colleague, Garrett Haake, who's with you as well. And we thought today was going to be all about Ukraine. And instead, 24 hours later, we're going to talk about Iran first. We're going to get to Ukraine in a moment. But that is because there has been a resumption of conflict, of military conflict between Iran and the United States. Do we know why it is that the president chose from NATO to launch these retaliatory strikes in the way in which he did and the degree to which he did on Iran?
It's really kind of just the undeniable backdrop to everything that the president does, and certainly has been the case for the last few weeks and months, Yasmin, and this, I think, is no exception. Even though he's on the world stage at a NATO summit discussing a ton of different things, the fact that we're also here in the region puts just extra emphasis on all of it. Turkey borders Iran. They share about a 330-mile border. And so, of course, it's top of mind. But it's also the kind of thing where if the president views, as we have heard from U.S. officials, that he is extremely upset by what he says Iran is doing by firing on these commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz, if he is here, he doesn't feel like he has the option not to respond, is sort of how it was put to us. Essentially, this is a president who thinks that the memorandum of understanding is no longer applicable, has basically said that the ceasefire is over, but now it's kind of putting him back at square one because he's not saying that he's going to resume major combat military options either. He's sort of putting this in a really murky middle ground that does erase some of the gains of the diplomatic negotiations while also telegraphing that there is going to be more military action, which could be a significant escalation, or this could kind of fizzle out the way that it did a little bit ago in the last few weeks, where you did see exchange of fire between the two sides. That's something that has still happened, even with the tentative deal that was in place.
Well, and you mentioned that he could strike again, saying he could hit hard tonight. You mentioned where Turkey is in relation to Iran, literally bordering Iran, as you said. What has been the reaction from the NATO leaders there amidst this resumption of conflict?
It's interesting because the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, who's somebody who actually has a pretty close relationship with the president and has really heaped a lot of praise and flattery on the president to sort of get him to stay on this side of the alliance. He said that he didn't have a problem with what the U.S. did. And some of the other European leaders also said that if this is in response to hostilities that Iran is starting, they understand the U.S. position here. But what the president talked about today would be going beyond that. He said that the U.S. was prepared to strike desalination plants, potentially other infrastructure in Iran. He said we might take Karg Island. When he was kind of asked to follow up and expand on that, he said, okay, maybe not right now, but he didn't take it off the table. So he's talking about, again, major escalations that European allies have expressed reservations about. And the backdrop, again, to all of this, Yasmin, is that the president is annoyed, he says, at European allies who he feels didn't do enough to support him when he started this war. But all of those allies say if you wanted NATO to be with you, you should have consulted us before you started this military conflict on February 28th. And instead, because they weren't, they say that they haven't been on the same page. And that has really been a lot of the tension here. He came in railing against them. He said essentially that they were ungrateful. He has a whole litany of issues that he has with NATO, but specifically on that. But interestingly, in this press conference, he basically left saying that he was more pleased than he would have thought leaving about the state of NATO and the alliance, and that if there was even one word he had to choose to describe the days of meetings, that it would be unification, and that he did feel that things were headed more in the right direction. A very different tone, and so that kind of stood out to me.
So let's talk then Ukraine. It seems like Zelensky has made some headway with the president, and especially when it comes to the Patriot missiles. What did they agree on?
That was a headline. The fact that the president basically is saying he's going to allow Ukraine to produce their own Patriot interceptors. These are these really important missile interceptors that Zelensky's been asking about for years, saying he's wanted more of them. He has even asked the U.S. to give him some of theirs. The president said, well, no, we need ours, in his words, but we will basically work with the company to grant you the license so that you can make your own. The problem with that, potentially, Yasmin, is the timing of it. I mean, that's going to take some time, and that is certainly a concern of Zelensky given the current state of the battlefield, but that is a big development. Zelensky came to this meeting essentially asking for some of this critical air defense system support that other European allies have said they want to help with. So the fact that the US and the president say that they're game to add to that was significant, but also the president keeps saying that he thinks there could be some conclusion to this almost 4.5-year war. But caveat, we have heard that so many different times from him without seeing that kind of progress. So is this time any different? Hard to say.
Let's talk about Air Force One, because there's some mystery surrounding why it is the president is not taking this newly minted Air Force One back home from this NATO summit, and instead he's taking the old one. What is going on here?
This is bizarre. And as somebody who has covered the White House for over a decade, I mean, what makes aircraft Air Force One is the president being on it, right? So the fact that there was this new Air Force One that was a gift that was donated by Qatar, a $400 million luxury jet that the president accepted and said he was going to turn into Air Force One. And the president and the White House really touted this new plane that he just started using in the last couple of weeks, that now he is saying he's not going to be flying home on for the first leg of the journey from Turkey back to the USA. He announced today, to the surprise of a lot of people, that the new Air Force One jet was going to be flying to Royal Air Force Base Mildenhall in the UK ahead of him. So it left before he did, so that Air Force members, he says, can tour it, can come aboard it, can take a look at it. And then he is going to fly on the old Air Force One. So the Air Force One that was in operation just until very, very recently, to the base. And then a senior White House official tells me that he plans to fly on the new Air Force One back to Joint Base Andrews. So something there is a little bit interesting to us. But the president was asked today if this is because there are any security concerns, given the fact that we have seen the fighting resume between the US and Iran. And he sort of dismissed that. He didn't completely answer that aspect, instead saying that he was just very proud and excited that the new jet could be traveling, he said, to multiple Air Force bases, which was also news to us. We understand it's just going to one in the UK, and then he will board it and head home on that.
Monica, Alba, thank you.
Thanks.
So even before these latest round of strikes, talks between the U.S. and Iran were on pause this week, while Iran holds a multi-day funeral procession for its former supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, negotiations were supposed to restart after Khamenei's burial on Thursday, but now the status of those talks is up in the air. Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says the U.S. is violating the memorandum of understanding with its renewed attacks. Iranian officials continue to insist that the MOU gives them control of the Strait of Hormuz. But President Trump is now threatening to reimpose the U.S. blockade on the strait. So how are people inside of Iran reacting to this fighting? And what's it going to take to get them back to the negotiating table, if ever? For that, I want to bring in NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, who's been reporting this week from Tehran. Hi, Richard.
Good to be with you again.
So I want to talk about the Iranian side of things because you're there. And when you and I spoke on Monday, Richard, you said you had attended the procession, the funeral of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the now deceased former supreme leader of Iran. And in that procession, in this funeral, the country, the government was portraying a sense of real, strength and unity. And you saw that in the streets as hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Iranians were in the streets for that funeral. The president is now calling the Iranian government that they have been negotiating with scum. A few weeks ago, he said that they seem sensible people to negotiate with. He is also saying, let's just finish the job. So how is the Iranian government reacting right now to some of what we have been hearing from the president of the United States?
So there are many sides to the Iranian government. There's the Iranian civilian government, and there is the Revolutionary Guard. And the Iranian civilian government has been talking in very legalistic diplomatic terms. They say that the U.S. is violating the memorandum of understanding, the MOU, and that it continues to violate the MOU, and that the MOU allows Iran, in partnership with Oman, the Sultanate of Oman, to govern the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, and this is according to Iranian officials that I've been speaking to directly, wants to have the sole and exclusive responsibility to demine the Strait of Hormuz. They don't want other countries coming in because that would imply that they have sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran also wants to charge a fee. They're not calling it a toll. They're calling it a maritime service charge.
When it comes to oil, as part of this understanding, the U.S. was allowing Iran to sell oil to the global market. That temporary waiver has now subsequently been revoked, and oil prices skyrocketed back up. How are Iranian officials responding to that, to the U.S. now doubling back on that agreement?
Well, that is also, according to the Iranians, another violation of the MOU. And they are saying that this is more proof that this agreement is disingenuous, that the U.S. is perhaps just buying time in order to rearm itself, in order to restart the war. So Iranians are very skeptical. Iranian government officials I've been speaking to are very skeptical about this process. They've told me time and time again that they entered into negotiations with the U.S. twice. They were attacked both times, and they say it's happening yet again. But let's not forget, it was the Iranians that started this particular round. There was supposed to be a lull in military activity during the funeral, and the funeral ceremonies are still underway with Khamenei's body in Iraq before being buried back in Iran in his hometown of Mashhad on Thursday. And it was the Iranians that fired first to enforce this their hold on the Strait of Hormuz, and now we're in this cycle, which we really don't know where it's going.
To be clear, the retaliation from the United States was much bigger than the initial firings from Iran.
Correct. And the first strikes were not lethal. The first strikes, according to maritime authorities, damaged these ships, but didn't cause significant environmental damage, didn't cause loss of life.
Got it.
The U.S. responded with I think it's 80 different targets according to CENTCOM, and 60 different small boats that were attacked. So the U.S. responded in a much larger fashion than what Iran did.
You're in Tehran, right? Central Iran. These strikes happened in the south, Bandar Abbas, for instance, which is literally in the Strait of Hormuz, which is on the coast of Iran. You said life is going about as normal in Tehran.
Normal in the sense that there's no panic on the streets. There's no visible change today in Tehran than there was yesterday or the day before. They've been in this war footing for several months now. And Iranians, most people on the streets, don't want, obviously, to go back to war. They want to get the economy moving again. They want to engage with the world. But when I meant life is normal, it's normal for a country that is isolated, sanctioned, and is under attack, and has been for the last 4 months.
So, we heard this press conference as the president wrapped his NATO visit. And he was asked quite directly, is the war back on? Is the ceasefire over? And he wouldn't necessarily say it's over. But I mentioned he says, maybe we just need to finish the job. But then he also said, well, we could still talk to them, but I don't think anything is going to happen. And I'm paraphrasing that part. Are we just going to be in this perpetual wartime with Iran where they may come back to the table in 10 days or so, and there may be further negotiations, and then they strike again? Is this the new normal, it seems, for Iran, U.S., Israel, Lebanon relations?
It seems like that's where we're heading now, at least in the short and medium term, that we're going to be in a low-level conflict in the Strait of Hormuz for quite some time. Because if you go back to that vague memorandum of understanding, it's very hard. The two sides are incredibly far apart. They interpret it very differently. They have to reach a complete understanding of on the MOU and then move on to concluding a cessation of hostilities, an end of conflict agreement. In order, according to the Iranian interpretation, for there to be an end of conflict agreement, Israeli troops need to withdraw from South Lebanon. Prime Minister Netanyahu has said the Israeli troops are not going to withdraw from South Lebanon. In order to just advance the MOU, the fighting has to stop in South Lebanon, and it hasn't really stopped in South Lebanon. That's just one issue that could and likely will continue to frustrate this process. So we could be entering into a fairly long-term, low-level conflict because these differences are so great and their interpretations are so vastly divergent.
Richard Engel, my friend, thank you.
Good to join you again.
So it is a good day for fans of Dr. Robbie and the entire crew at the Pitt. Emmy nominations are in. The show is leading the pack with a whopping 25 nominations. Hacks, the comedy show about a comedian, was close behind with 24 for its final season, by the way. So for more on this, the big winners, the snubs, and what to expect at this year's awards ceremony, I want to bring in NBC News senior Hollywood reporter Rebecca Keegan. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi.
What is kind of the standout thing for you as we take in some of these nominations from today?
Well, you may have noticed, the big shows, the most nominated shows this year were The Pitt and Hacks, both shows coming from HBO, which is this network at this incredibly important moment. HBO has traditionally been the sort of crown jewel of Warner Brothers Discovery. It's this sort of power prestige TV brand, and it's about to be acquired by Paramount Skydance in this giant media merger that really has a lot of the industry kind of on tenterhooks. So to see HBO, kind of show up in this way and get so many nominations is an interesting endorsement for its strategy at a time when a lot is potentially about to change.
Yeah, I mean, it shows obviously the value of HBO, which everybody has known because they do have so much good content, it seems. But this obviously just drives that messaging home. When you're talking about these nominations, we mentioned Hacks, we mentioned The Pitt, both incredible shows. Watch them all. What else came through?
One of the shows that really performed well is a new show called Widow's Bay.
Love it.
Me too. Sort of very weird comedy horror show starring Matthew Rhys, which is on Apple TV Plus. And so this is a show that signals in some way the kind of next generation. Apple TV Plus had, I think, 89 nominations today. So as we were just talking about how important HBO is, we're seeing the emergence of a new prestige TV power player. Apple TV Plus also had the show Pluribus perform really well. These are new shows building new audiences. One of the complaints historically about the Emmys is, it's the same shows year after year. So to see new shows getting acknowledgement is always kind of exciting for people.
Also, Subway Takes. We interviewed Kareem Rama on this show, got its first nomination in the Outstanding Short Form Comedy.
Right, showing the emergence of YouTube. Talk about new players and how the industry is changing. It's not just about the same old networks now. We're seeing newcomers like Subway Takes showing up.
What about the snubs? Because the big talk of the town for a long time has been heated rivalry, right? There wasn't a woman that I met that hadn't watched Heated Rivalry. They didn't get a nomination.
Well, funny enough, Heated Rivalry was not eligible to be nominated because it was a Canadian production, so not up for it. So not so much a snub as a procedural omission, but interestingly, Connor Story, who plays the Russian character, did get a nomination for hosting Saturday Night Live. So Heated Rivalry fans will clearly have a reason to tune into the Emmys this year. When you mentioned snubs, the first thing that came to mind is Taylor Sheridan, the sort of power producer. He has the shows Landman, Madison, hugely successful shows, giant movie stars. They didn't get any nominations in this sort of big above-the-line categories for actors like Michelle Pfeiffer, you would think would be acknowledged, Kurt Russell, they're the stars of the Madison. Interesting to see that Taylor Sheridan, despite being incredibly successful, continues to kind of get ignored at the Emmys.
Let's talk about the consolidated variety category, because it means now that SNL, Saturday Night Live, is going to be pitted against John Oliver's Last Week Tonight and the last season of The Late Show with Colbert. What is with kind of this category consolidation, the confusion, and what does it mean for Colbert's chances?
You know, it is interesting, right? I mean, those seem like such different types of shows that require such different types of skill sets. It is hard to imagine anybody beating Stephen Colbert this year, coming in, after his final season with all of the sort of tension and drama of the way the show was canceled. That feels like the clear favorite. But as you said, the category is sort of strange and includes a lot of different types of shows.
You know, I feel like Mariska Hargitay is having a moment, and maybe I'm like totally off base here in saying that because she's been a part of Law & Order and SVU for so long. But I feel like her star is rising even higher than it already was. She's 62 years old, right? She has been front and center, obviously, with the Knicks finals because she's a huge Jalen Brunson and Knicks fan. She has this one-woman show on Broadway, which we've been seeing a lot of press about, and she is hosting the Emmys. And by the way, the first time a woman has hosted the Emmys since 2011, which is shocking to me.
Amazing. Yeah, you're right. She is suddenly seeming everywhere. And I think there's a feeling among a lot of people who have been fans of hers for a long time, like, I don't know what took so long, but I'm so glad to see her here.
And she had the documentary, obviously, about her mother as well, which I forgot to mention.
She made a documentary about her mom. And of course, Law & Order SVU is one of those shows that has just endured and built a fan base across generations. And she's really sort of reaping the benefit of that fan base now and popping up in pop culture in all kinds of ways. But really interesting to see what she does as a host of the Emmys. You know, that's traditionally a role held by a comedian or a talk show host. So I'm very curious to see how she handles it and what the show is like.
I'm wondering if her one-woman show at all contributed to the choice of her being the host for the Emmys, because it seems as if she kind of really took on, in some respects in this one-woman show, a comedic stance. And it's not necessarily something that we had seen from Mariska Hargitay before. Very exciting.
Yes.
Rebecca Keegan, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That is going to do it for us at Here's the Scoop from NBC News. I'm Yasmin Vasugian. We'll be back tomorrow with whatever the day may bring. And if you like what you heard and you saw, press the subscribe button. We'll see you tomorrow.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.